All right, this is Hal Shurtleff of Girard at Large, filling in as your guest host. And I'm in the studio with Ed Naile. And that's kind of good, lively music to start a morning with. Chuck Berry, that's right.
Can't beat it. It's timeless.
Well, the mayor was supposed to be in, but he's not in here. So we have dead air. No, actually, we have a lot of things to talk about. And I brought a book into the studio with me. It's called Lives of the Signers. And July 4th, we sometimes would say, have a happy July 4th. We don't celebrate a day. We celebrate what happened on that day, Independence Day, a very an important part of one of the most important events in our nation's history.
World history.
In world history. Because what other nations looked at when what we did.
If it wasn't for us, where would the rest of the world be?
Exactly.
Flat out, that's the way it is, you know.
And one of the things I've done over the years is have information tables, usually on July 4th in downtown Boston. This year I'll be at camp. And what we do is we have a table that says, honor the lives of the signers. How many can you name? And we want to kind of put people on the spot a little bit, but also want to help them learn. And I know when people teach me something, I don't care what your political views are, what your racial background is. If you teach me something, I appreciate that. And so we're not here trying to be confrontational. We're trying to say, hey, how many can you name? You're down here, you're watching the fireworks, you're down here celebrating, you have a happy 4th shirt on. What are you celebrating? Well, what did these men do? Well, this book was actually originally published in 1848, and it's public domain. You can actually go to Google Books and have it. But David Barton's group, Wall Builders, and I got an issue with David Barton, but he's done a lot of great work. I won't go into that issue at this point. And I'd like to make this book available. We'll have it at our book table at Camp Constitution. But it has a list of the various little biographical sketches of the signers. And, of course, most people think that they signed it on July 4th. And the wonderful musical 1776 shows them signing it on the day. But actually, the only person who signed it on July 4th was John Hancock. And so I say to you, if you really want to honor you want to honor July 4th, learn the Independence Day, learn a little bit about these incredible men.
Half of them were ministers.
There were a lot of members of the clergy. Most of them, if not all of them, most of them had a very strong Christian worldview. People like Benjamin Franklin. Although when Benjamin Franklin at the Constitutional Convention, there was a little, there was some kind of stalemate, and he said something to the effect that if a sparrow can hit the ground without God's knowledge, a great nation can't rise up. And that's when he called for prayer. And it wasn't his little, 30-second prayer that didn't want to offend anybody. They got down on their knees and they prayed for a long time. There's a picture of them kneeling. Right. And I said, no, they're not looking for a coin. They're actually praying on their, And the reason why they didn't pray at that point early on is because there was denominational differences, and they didn't feel comfortable with it. So Benjamin Franklin, even Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was not what you'd call a traditional Christian, Orthodox Christian.
Yeah, read his quotes.
But yes, he considers himself a Christian, and that's what he calls himself. I'm not going to argue with that. And he did have the Jefferson Bible, where he took out some of the more miraculous things. But yeah, you read his quotes. He definitely believed in the Christian worldview and the Christian culture anyway. And it's interesting. I mentioned earlier about John Calvin being one of the original founding fathers, philosophical founders. And even you don't have to be a Calvinist to know that man is pretty nasty. Just learn history. I mean, you look at history, it's mostly the history of people killing each other, you see. So that's why it was so important to have not just checks and balances at one level, but at all levels. State governments and the federal government has its checks and balances, and then the states are checks and balances and so forth. So The Lives of the Signers is available on Amazon, and I guess it's a very important book. You should understand a little bit about those founders. And also, why not read the Declaration of Independence? I remember my 8th grade, I went to a public school in Boston, and even though we had look-say, I had trouble with it, so my mother had to teach me how to read. So I was a pretty good student because I knew how to read. And my 8th grade history teacher, Mrs. Wolf, and I don't know if she was a liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. I know she loved America. She loved the United States. And she made us memorize the preamble of the Constitution, and about 2 paragraphs of the Independence, and I still can rattle it off.
Yeah, some schools you have to write it.
Yeah,
write the whole thing out over and over again.
Yeah, what schools are that? Not too many schools today doing that.
No, you'd be sued.
Yeah. So, also, I mentioned earlier the Sam Blumenfeld Archives. If you are a homeschooler, if you are having trouble, someone in your family has trouble reading because they probably learned to do a look-say method. If you're a historian, a researcher, an archivist, or whatever, I would recommend visiting the Sam Blumenfeld Archive. You go to our website, campconstitution.net, and you'll find a world of things there. And Sam, and I'm very glad that you actually met Sam or heard him speak. Sam was a phenomenal man. He was born in New York City in the mid-20s. His parents were Russian immigrants, Jewish immigrants.
Pretty common back in those days.
Yeah.
Yep.
His mother was illiterate, and he went to the New York public schools where he learned how to read.
Where
and
he
said,
made the best of what was offered.
You better believe it.
He had access to a public education.
To a good education. And he said his teachers didn't care what religion he was. They didn't care how he felt. They didn't care what his background. All you had to give him was your address and a phone number in case something happened. Or did they even? I don't know if it was a phone number or an address, so they can, if something happened, they can get a hold of your parents. And he said the teachers loved it. He said we loved our teachers because they were doing something good to us. They were helping us learn skills and things that we need to be successful in life.
Making them more powerful.
And then he was a World War II veteran. He served in Italy. It was sort of late in the war, 45, and he has poetry that I found. And I inherited his library, and there was a lot of things in there, like 200 boxes of books and papers.
And they're heavy boxes, aren't they?
Oh yeah.
I moved the library one time.
Some of the books he said just sell and put the proceeds to Camp Constitution, and some of his papers though he wrote a poem. He was actually escorting German POWs.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's a man of that time. He was a man of the Jewish faith, and they probably didn't have a high regard for German soldiers or represented the Nazi regime. But he had a compassion. He said these guys were half starved, and he actually shared his food with with one of the soldiers, and he mentioned that he didn't want to be friendly with them, but he had a sense of humanity too. And Sam, he went to New York City College, and he went back to Europe. He traveled to Europe. He traveled to the Middle East, the whole Israel, and he ended up being an editor for Grosset and Dunlap, and he was editing the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew mysteries.
That's great.
And he got to know a lot of authors. He knew James Baldwin. And I have some of the correspondence. I don't have that letter that he. I had the letter he sent to James, but not the letter that he wrote back. He knew Ayn Rand, and I hope I'm pronouncing Ayn, not Anne, Ayn Rand. And he said that he met her as he was publishing a book written by Ann's mentor, who had passed away. It was a biography, I think, and I can't remember the woman's name offhand. She's well known in of course, those circles. But so he wanted her to write the foreword to the book. And he had a nice little sit-down with her. And he said at that time in his life, he called himself an atheist. He said, I was a sad atheist. Ayn Rand was a militant atheist. And he wasn't into that militant atheism. What got him in trouble, and I didn't know this until after he passed away, is that when some of the top people at Grosset and Dunlap had left or were on vacation, he published a book by Max Eastman about socialism, a paperback version, and they didn't like that. So he ended up having to leave, and he started his own publishing company for a couple of years, Coleridge Press, and he only published 2 books. He was a editor for the John Birch Society's American Opinion magazine and the Review of the News, and then he ended up doing his own, started in the early 70s, publishing. His first book was, I think, How to Start a Private School. And at that point, Sam was still an atheist, but a sad one, not an angry one. And he was doing some research on education and brought him to colonial New England. And he was looking up some of the early colonial laws of Massachusetts, the Great Deceiver Satan Act, I think it was, where if you didn't, every town had to have a school. Now, these were towns managed locally. They were not, it was no mandated. It wasn't
run through the church usually.
Yeah, through the church. And the reason why is because they had to learn how to read the Bible or you'd be deceived by Satan.
Right.
And Sam got very impressed. He was very impressed with that, and that led him to Christianity after that research and the soundness of the early colonial era. Well, then Sam, he started. Initially, he was a big advocate of starting your own schools, your private schools, Christian schools. They're in the height of forced busing in Boston. I went through that.
Yeah.
And I lived right across the street from a junior high school. Just on the other side of the next side street was the Hyde Park Academy, which was founded in the wake of that. I didn't know that Sam was involved in founding that, and I found a speech he gave at the class's first graduation class. I didn't go. We couldn't afford to go there. I didn't. We had to tough it out in this miserable, this forced busing era. And that's another important issue too. You use the word forced and busing. And how can you have academic excellence? You're playing social experimentation. The notion, to me, it's a racist concept that in order for black students to achieve, you had to have people with white faces in that classroom. That is ridiculous. In fact,
would it work with a basketball team?
Yeah, I know. Well, if the guy could, slam and, do a 360 slam, and why not? But the notion that, and so the federal government came in and said, okay, well, this school, you have segregation, so you have to, we don't care if you live across the street. You now have to be on a bus, which is not very green, environmentally friendly, by the way, and you're going to be shipped across town, and it was just a miserable situation.
It's bean counter. Basically, bean counter communism,
and it caused more racial division than ever. Sure. I mean, it was a horrible situation.
Well, division's the end result. I mean,
and education was the last thing they were concerned about, academic excellence. And Sam was also a friend of Marva Collins. Marva Collins, they made a movie about her. She was a public school teacher in Chicago,
right,
and she was motivated to start her own school. I think it was called the West Side Preparatory School, which unfortunately is no longer in business, but it was thriving for a number of years. And I learned that Prince, the musician, actually donated money to her school at one point. And she took the worst of the worst in the public schools, and she made them into excellent students.
She did speaking tours for quite some time, too.
Yes, she did. And Sam knew her, and some of their correspondences in there.
Great.
And he was also the founder of American Friends of Gatanga, and he knew